right, hello everyone and welcome. We are here at the special committee on poverty in Prince Edward Island. So just to start out these meetings, we just refresh our memories on what are the main goals of this committee. So this committee is tasked with providing recommendations to establish clear definitions and measures of poverty and a living wage for Prince Edward Island. As well, we are within 12 months to report on fully costed recommendations regarding the creation of a basic income guarantee pilot for Prince Edward Island. I will just quickly let everybody know who is here, members of the committee. We have Heath McDonald sitting in for Sunny Glant, Gordon McNeely, Hannah Bell, Natalie Jameson, and Ernie Hudson. And also joining us today, we have Ola Hammerland and Michelle Beaton. So thank you everyone for being here. Today we have Nigel Burns he's the Director of Economic Statistics and Federal Fiscal Relations, so with the Department of Finance. We are very pleased to have him here. The format of these committees, as you're probably well aware, is that you will give us a presentation and then we'll open the floor for questions. So that's kind of how it goes. All right, so before we get started, we just need to approve the agenda. Hannah Bell, all right, all in favor of the agenda? Yes, wonderful. So with that, I will hand over the floor to Nigel. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, and thank you for having me here today to speak on the income tax system and provide some background and hopefully some context for your deliberations. So the objectives here, we'll spend most of the time on the overview of the current tax system and a little bit of background and context on how it came to be and where we're at. I will touch on integration with other support programs or benefit programs, and I will end the discussion with some comments around the concept of a negative income tax system. It might be helpful for the committee to, in thinking about the income tax system, is that we live in a federation, and income taxes in the federation is a shared jurisdiction between federal and provincial governments. So in the Constitution Acts, both federal and provincial governments can tax income. And it's under Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution Acts that the authority lies. Both the federal and provincial governments levy taxes on income, both at the personal level and also at the corporate level as well. So you've got kind of two independent actors taxing two sources of income. The system does require a level of coordination to prevent kind of overlapping and conflicting policies and objectives. So for PEI, income taxes do represent the single largest own source revenue to the province. They are a significant source of revenues to fund provincial spending programs, where this place spends most of its time in healthcare, social development, and education. Those are important sources of revenue to fund those programs. But we also have to be mindful that income taxes are also an important social policy tool that redistributes incomes earned in the province. For the province, it's mostly through the provision of public services and to a lesser extent transfers to individuals. So public services such as healthcare, education, transportation, justice, and the like. Just I don't have very many numbers in today's presentation, but just a few for a bit of reference. Income taxes in total account for a little over $480 million of revenue to the province in 18-19 fiscal year. These are just taken from the public accounts. Personal income tax is almost $390 million worth of revenue. and corporate making up about 94 million. In total, income tax revenues account for almost a quarter of total revenues to the province and over a third of own source revenues. A little bit about the basic design of the income tax system, which is there's a lot of moving parts in this system, but I just wanted to boil it down to just the basics. People pay income tax when their income exceeds some basic amount. And they pay progressively higher rates of income tax at higher levels of income. In PEI, there are 4 tax brackets. There are 3 that are explicit, and the surtax effectively acts like a fourth bracket, which I have in the table in front of you. The province also has a non-refundable block of credits that can be used to offset provincial tax owing, and there are also a small number of refundable credits that are available to individuals. Just to turn that table into a picture, this is what the tax rates and bracket thresholds would look like. So if you're in that blue area, you're covered by the basic personal amount and would not be paying any income tax. If your income ends up in the bracket 1, you'd pay 9.8% on that income. If your income stretches out up into bracket 2, you would pay on the first bracket, and the amount of income in the second bracket, you'd pay that rate, but only on that income that's in the second bracket. Similarly, in the third bracket, and if you're up into the about $100,000, you'd be into the surtax as a single individual. So a little bit about the history of the system we have. Again, getting back to we are in a federation. It does require some degree of coordination between governments. It's a very important agreement between PEI and the federal government. As the case with most of the provinces, the federal government administers PEI's income tax on our behalf, but there are some restrictions on policy flexibility. Now, those restrictions were loosened by a fairly considerable degree back, I guess, 20 years ago, when provinces moved to from a simple tax on tax regime to a tax on income system. And I'll get into that a little bit here. So this agreement allows for a high degree of commonality between the federal system and the provincial system. It does allow for the economical and efficient administration of income taxes and the free flow of capital, labor, and goods and services within the country. So it's something that helps the economic union of the country. For provinces that do agree to use the federal government to administer their tax under this agreement, the provinces agree to use the federal definition of what is taxable income and basically be a good neighbor, not poach the tax base or taxes based in other provinces. And the federal government will do this on our behalf. For some fees, they are to cover the additional cost of the tax and income system, which are relatively modest, and any additional provincial specific credits that are on a kind of a cost recovery basis. So under the old tax on tax environment, the federal government defined both taxable income, but also the rates, income thresholds, the brackets, and non-refundable credits. And whatever the resulting federal tax that was owed, the province could levy a tax on that amount. So back in the 90s, PEI had a 59.5% tax on basic federal tax. So if you had $1 of federal tax owed, you would owe an additional 59.5 cents to the province. So very simple, the provincial system was perfectly harmonized or common with the federal system. With some small margins at the edges there, provinces could levy a flat tax or a surtax. PEI did have a surtax at that time. But basically, paralleling the federal system to a very high degree was the result. And any changes to the federal system automatically flowed through to the province. So when they changed the definition of taxable income, that flowed through. That continues to flow through to the province. But the federal changes to credits, income thresholds, used to flow through, but now it's the province's choice to decide and to design how we want to express those credits for PEI circumstances. And that really is the system that we've been in now for about 20 years. So starting in 2001 for PEI, provinces gained additional policy control over the number of thresholds, the number of tax brackets, the tax rates that apply in those brackets, and the amounts and the design of the non-refundable credit block. So people are perhaps most familiar with the basic personal amount. The province can design almost whatever system it wants, and this is a lot of latitude to design something. We kind of start off with what we have right now, but that block is open for provincial design, redesign, as may be the case. So tax on income effectively delinked the provincial taxes from federal taxes. No longer a simple percent of BFT. We can design a more or less progressive tax system. We can have higher or lower non-refundable credits. We can do refundable credits and design those to meet the needs, the wants and desires of this province. So going back to, the system we have is basically starts off with what we ended up with back in 2001, where to get a sense of where we are today, you kind of have to go back into history to see what was done then. PEI in 2000 budget announced that in 2001 this conversion would happen. It would be revenue neutral to the taxpayer, and basically we just took a system that was a tax on tax and just imported into the provincial system the rates, brackets, thresholds that existed. So whether you completed the federal system and did it as a BFT or as the independent provincial system, the idea was you'd end up with the same amount of provincial tax owing. There was an important announcement at that time with the introduction of the low-income tax reduction program, which would reduce or eliminate provincial tax owing for people with low and to some extent modest levels of income. Just to give an expression of how that conversion happened and where did our tax rates come from, it was a simple crosswalk of the federal rates multiplied by the BFT rate that would have otherwise existed, at that time 57.5%. And that's the magic behind the 9.8% rate, the 13.8% and the 16.7% rates. And the province did import the non-refundable credit block as it was intended to be, and the surtax remained in place with no changes to it. So this, just to show that, the federal amounts that were anticipated going into 2001 and what the provincial amounts were. Most of those rates, apart from the basic, have largely stayed very similar to what they were back then. The disability amounts have risen. The education amounts did increase in the mid-2000s. And the basic personal exemption has been kind of moved incrementally over time. And the basic personal amount was most recently raised just this year for 2020 tax year to $10,000. And the low income tax reduction program, when it was introduced, the idea would be it was a non-refundable credit. So if you're in low income and you end up with a bit of provincial income tax owing, this program would either partially or fully offset that amount. It has been increased somewhat over time. The 2020 amounts is status quo are for $350 of tax for a single individual. That's worth an additional about $3,500 on top of the basic personal amount. Because of the 9.8% rate, it has the same effect. So that's a measure to target some tax relief at the low end of the income spectrum. And while it's a non-refundable credit, it is transferable to a spouse who may have some tax owing. Just a little schedule of the changes to the PEI system over the last 20 years. I'll not dwell on this too much, but these have been incremental changes over time, largely to introduce or amend existing credits to kind of bump them up a little bit, and some additional credits like the teacher's school supply credit, an equity tax credit. The province did implement a refundable credit for volunteer firefighters. With the introduction of the harmonized sales tax, offered a refundable credit to low and modest income households. And since 2015, the focus has been on raising the basic personal amounts and the thresholds and amounts for the low income tax reduction over that period. So the PEI system does provide for marginally higher rates of tax on higher income. It provides basic tax relief through non-refundable credits, and the basic personal amounts, disability credits, and so forth. It does provide some targeted tax relief to groups, seniors through the age and pension amounts, students through education, tuition, student loan interest relief. Single parents can benefit from the equivalent to spouse provisions for their child. Families with young children under 6 can benefit from the young child amount. And the disability amounts are there. There's a school supply credit. And targeted measures for low-income individuals through the low-income tax reduction. I did also bring along kind of a leave behind the simple forms for the federal and provincial income tax. I guess people are moving away from filling them out in paper, so a paper copy might help familiarize the basic blocks. My intention wasn't to go through it in any detail, but just to have it, just to give it to you if you.
Will it be a test at the end, right?
No, there's no test at the end. But in your questions later on, there might be some things to refer to. But at this point, I'd like to just turn to the integration with benefit programs, which are, I think that's perhaps the focus of this committee. We've got a really, I guess you could describe it as a system of systems. We have a system to raise revenue for provincial purposes, income tax. We've got a system federally to do similar for the federal system. We have a suite of income tested supports at the provincial level, similarly with the federal level as well. And when you bring these together, bearing in mind that they were developed independently, with some coordination among the two orders of government, but we use that kind of loosely, and across departments, both federally and provincially. These programs were designed with specific purposes, and not always with the broader context. Apart from trying to find some measure of income, and this is where perhaps some sense of integration happens in the definition of income. For provincial programs, for income tested programs, tend to refer to some measure of income as recorded on someone's tax return, but not exclusively. There are other resources that get brought into the calculation of income for the purposes of determining eligibility or for provincial programs. So there's different measures. Not all of them are the same, either provincially or federally. We can observe that when we look across provincial programs. And it's not to say that it's right or wrong. It's just they do use different measures of income. In social assistance, there's the measure of income for that purpose does include some measure of total resources available to you. So in some sense, some measures of assets, which aren't part of the income tax system and would appear appropriate for the purpose at hand. For housing benefits, it's a different measure of income, but for the purposes of housing, it's probably appropriate. For the provincial drug programs, there are, within the number of income tested programs, they do refer to different measures of income. In some cases, total income, or some cases, kind of a net family income measure. And that's partially because they were developed kind of independently over time. This is also true at the federal level, which I don't really speak on an authoritative voice on their programs, but child benefits are income tested, and they do use a measure of income which is different than what they would use for the workers' benefit, which is a credit you can earn by participating in the labor market. And for seniors, the guaranteed income supplement uses a different measure of income. It's just to say that we, depending on the program and the level of government, they do use different measures of income. And I think at this point we'll touch on the concept of a negative income tax, which I guess when you start to look through the two levels of government and across the various departments that offer income-tested programs, what starts to emerge is a system that starts to look kind of like a negative income tax system. And when you put it together, some might argue that we're closer to a negative income tax type system than we might otherwise think. We can look at when integrating and kind of combining these programs on a unified basis, for people and families who have no income or very low income, they do qualify for provincial programs like social assistance. And if they're seniors, they would qualify for guaranteed income supplements on top of old age security or OAS. And really pay no income tax at all if their income is zero. And over time, as other income or earned incomes or investment income or as income rises, these benefit programs or supports are phased out or withdrawn. And over time, or further up the range of incomes being earned, taxes start getting phased in. They happen through different levels of government, they happen through different departments, they happen through different programs, but that's in general what's happening. There's no one kind of unified program that does this all. It happens across the system. But when you bring it all together, that starts to be the picture that emerges. Now, as earnings rise, it is important to be aware of the interaction between earning an additional dollar of income and what happens to the benefits that you were receiving. And why this is important is you don't want to leave people worse off by working. So if people are working and earning another dollar, there should be a net kind of getting ahead, having made that effort. So the withdrawal or the phase out of benefit programs it's an important interaction to be careful of. If we have this concept of the welfare wall is a concept where earning an additional dollar or another additional $1,000 of income might result in maybe $1,000 or more of benefits being withdrawn. That's an important factor in people's decision making about working. It's an important interaction that needs, you need to integrate these programs at some level. I wouldn't suggest kind of bringing them all together, but there does need to be some kind of process of integrating to bring to light and to be aware of the interactions of the various actors federally, provincially, and within the provincial family of departments, the impact that their proposed changes are having on this interaction. I should also point out and end off with this last the formal presentation being the be aware and get your share kind of program promotion of government which is a multi-departmental effort to help islanders access the benefits that they're eligible for. This is so within the province, the departments have been and continue to work on this effort, and we do it within some important collaboration with the federal government through Canada Revenue Agency, who run a very important program called the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program, which helps low-income islanders or people who might face some barriers to completing a tax return to actually complete a tax return, which will enable them, through filing a tax return and getting a notice of assessment, be eligible for most of the income tested programs that are on offer. So that concludes the formal part of the presentation. Happy to take questions.
All right, thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you for making sure we're all on the same page on the income tax system. That was very helpful, clarifying those points. I'm going to now open the floor to questions. We have Hannah Bell.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. I'll ask the first couple and then I can
Yes,
come
I
back
think
and
that's
be fair. Thank you, Nigel. So focus is that we've been talking about is the how do we assist, how do we address the kind of the barriers, particularly at the low income level. And there's a couple of avenues that I'm focusing on here. One of them is the low income tax reduction, and then the other one is the basic exemption rate. And right now, it's about 10K for basic exemption, then and then with the non-refundable tax credit for the LITR, it means that you can earn about $13,500, more or less, before that tax rate kicks in. I see then that there's a couple of channels that we could potentially address, hitting more aligning with what we recognize now is the poverty rate, or what's considered kind of one of those measures of income in relation to low income, which is around $20,000 a year under the market basket measure. So if that was something, for instance, that we were looking at, and this is very simple, it's going to be more complex than that, but there are those two channels. I'm wondering about if there's an option for us to think about adding in a bracket with that 0% or increasing the 0% rate just specifically based on income, so that, for instance, anyone who is earning 20,000 or less is at a zero rate before then that phasing in of the rate that begins to apply. Or would it be better to do it through or a combination of that with the LITR?
You can do either.
Yeah.
There are important implications of doing it. If you took the basic personal exemption and took it from 10,000 to 20,000, that would be, and the basic personal exemption would affect all taxpayers?
Right, and if I could just clarify, Chair, I'm asking about specifically not doing it for all taxpayers. I'm asking about if we can make an exemption that targets those with that low income. Because I understand the difference. Raising the basic tax exemption for everybody is incredibly expensive, but it also doesn't necessarily benefit somebody in the same way with a much higher tax bracket than it would do for somebody who is in that lower one. Can we target the exemption?
Well, the low-income tax reduction program effectively does that targeting.
Okay.
So someone who has income, let's say $35,000 of income, as a single person wouldn't get any benefit from the low-income tax reduction. But if your income was, let's say, $20,000, you'd be seeing a significant. You'd start to be having some of it phased out because the threshold is currently 18,000. But if your income was $18,000, you would have you'd benefit from that $350 of reduction.
Yeah.
So
So if I can follow up from that, there's two pieces in that. One of them is increasing the threshold, but it's also increasing the amount that is covered, because they're even with the current LITR, if you are earning 18,000, you're still paying some tax. It doesn't negate all of the tax. So you're still, the idea of getting to the point where people are not paying to income, we're refunding so that they're at a zero tax rate if they're under the low income threshold.
you could design something that would achieve that end.
Okay.
Hannah?
The other piece that we've also obviously, because of the relationship between provincial and federal, obviously that there's a different conversation. The federal tax would still apply in that case. We would be looking different than what happens on a federal basis. And one of the things that you'd mentioned is around the different non-refundable and refundable that comes based on things like disability and age and so on. Are we able to model what the loss in revenue is when you begin? Is that one of the options that we have, or do we need to go to perhaps some of the experts we've talked to who have statistical modeling, or is that something that you can do in-house to model sort of, if we do this, how much is it going to remove from revenue lines?
We have the capability to do that analysis. It's certainly easier to model a change on an existing credit. So, for example, the basic personal amount, we can model that one very quite easily. For most of the credits, for most of the situations you might be thinking about, as long as we've got either an existing provincial credit or a federal credit, we could imply the impact of a change to that credit, what might be for, in terms of both revenues to the province, but also to like how many people would it affect,
right,
and to what degree.
Right.
Those questions are possible to answer. Yes.
That's very helpful.
Hannah, we'll do one more from you and then we'll move
Thank
on.
you. Thank you very much. I think, and what I'd mentioned earlier, and you mentioned it there about the number of different measures of income, which is really interesting because we know we have a really good rate of return of people doing income tax returns in PEI. I can't remember the number offhand, but the Get Your Share program it's still, obviously we're not getting everybody to do them, but it is definitely helped. But part of one of the things we've talked about in this committee is about the complexity of systems and how that can be a barrier to people being able to access support. So the tax system isn't the only space where those complexity. And you mentioned a few of them. I know, for instance, with the housing program, when income is assessed, it doesn't include the cost of childcare. So the actual income, household income versus the on-paper income can look very different if you're not including that as a cost, for example. We've talked a lot about a measure of poverty rather than income as being a critical piece. It changes the conversation about, rather than how much money people have, but what do they need. And market basket measure is what's being used on the federal basis. Could you just speak briefly to sort of how that could connect to, I understand we still need measures of income because we need those hard numbers when we're talking about tax returns, but how does that measure of those other measures kind of connect to the income measure, or is it not on the radar?
Well, I think for the income tax system, like, its design is really to raise revenue, to define income that ought to be subject to tax, and try to arrive at a broad consensus as to what income ought to be taxed. It's fundamental to the acceptance of the system that people believe that these things should be taxed. And that's quite different than, I think, the question that you're posing is like determining someone's needs and measuring that level of income to satisfy that needs might be quite different than determining of your income what part of it should be subject to tax. Because there are streams of income that are taxed, like wages are taxed. Certain transfers are, generally transfers to individuals are not taxed, but some of them are. Is there kind of a magic definition? It's about building that consensus of what is the level and what should be in the basket, I guess, of measures for determining people's needs. And if the market basket measure is kind of appearing to be kind of a yardstick to use. The tax system is probably not going to, be appropriate to kind of measure, bring that into the measure, but probably the support programs, benefit programs, can observe, the intended outcome and try to get, to some extent, getting benefits aligned with or consistent with or closer to whatever that level is for different. I understand it's different for different family circumstances, but for I guess I'll leave it there.
No, that's really helpful because it is about they have separate functions, but where they connect. I mean, for instance, setting the threshold for what is the low income could come from the agreement that the market basket measure is agreed to be the threshold for low income. That would inform the tax policy, but the implementation of that still happens in the social program system. But there is some, potentially that's one of those cross points. But I really appreciate your clarification on that in terms of what is the income tax system designed to do, not losing sight that it is that huge piece of our revenue story in the province. So we want to make sure that context is there as well when we're talking about adjustments. So.
And I think it's putting a clearer picture of the tax and benefit system together. That would help shed light on what parts of it are working quite well, and there are parts of it that work remarkably well, and some parts that might need some attention. So there are gaps, and I think we hear about the gaps, and that's probably filling the gaps is probably the direction.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair. And before we move on, I just want to acknowledge Roxanne Carter-Thompson, who is here again today from the Adventure Group. So thank you, Roxanne, for following along with the work of this committee and being here today. Minister Ernie Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nigel, for a very informative presentation. Second last slide under negative income tax, third bracket down, states as earnings rise, the interaction between phasing out/in of benefits and taxes is important for workforce attachment. Just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the considerations process that is used now so that you're not putting individuals into a situation that because of tax brackets, incentives, what have you, that it is a detriment to employment. And also on a go-forward basis, just what suggestions that you might have on that.
Okay. I think in terms of processes, across the ministries, we do have forums where we discuss, potential changes. I think in social assistance framework, have been some important changes. It wasn't that long ago, the phase-out rate of social assistance, I believe, was 90 cents on the dollar. So if you have a dollar of earnings, you'd lose 90 cents on social assistance. That was reduced so that for every dollar of earnings that you have, you can keep, I think maybe the phase-out rate of benefits now is, I believe, 70%. So you can, you went from a situation where you might be keeping 10 cents on the dollar to keeping kind of 30. I believe those are the numbers that are used. So it certainly is made work pay more for people on very low or entering the labor market.
Ernie Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and that's correct. There's also an amount, total amount before there's any impact on the assistance as well that an individual can earn. If it is on SA over a month period or month-to-month period before that kicks in as well. But just, I think when you look at what the mandate of the committee is here, and it's one of the things that has been brought up previously that we've had discussions on, is just where do you hit that and how do you hit that balance of not providing a disincentive, I guess I would have to say. So I appreciate your comments on that, Nigel, but just wondering too if you would have any suggestions on a broader perspective right across the board in the event that we were looking at or do look at a basic income guarantee, whether it's permanent or whether it's a pilot, but the ways that as a government that can be addressed, and my colleague Hannah had mentioned there 20,000. So is there a sliding scale, for example, that you would recommend that if a basic income guarantee is 20,000 and I'm working at a position that pays minimum wage or not much more than minimum wage, again, that sliding scale, so I'm at minimum wage, I'm making as an individual 23,000, 24,000 gross a year, and there are costs associated, certainly with especially in rural areas, but for example, traveling to work, things along that line. So how do we hit that balance?
That's the hard question. That's
And it's one certainly that I think that we struggle with, or I do anyway, how to hit that balance, and it is important to be able to hit it.
and it's perhaps important to recognize that we currently have minimum incomes. That's largely defined by the social assistance program. It does have minimums that certain family types, basically it's the floor that is for people to have enough money for that month to at least have some level of shelter, food, meeting your basic needs. The question of, I guess is it adequate? Does it meet the kind of the social norms of what society thinks that people should have as minimums? For some groups, it's probably there. For different family types, it might be. It might not be. But the interaction between what's available, what someone could earn through work, might be not as much as this kind of ideal level of income as a minimum. So how do we get work to pay enough, I guess, is part of the question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, which probably slides into another one of the criteria under the motion or under what we are looking at as a committee, livable income. But I guess with that, with regard to social assistance, certainly, you look at different categories, whether it's a single individual, whether it's a couple with 2 children, and the percentage of market basket measure that does provide for. There is variation there. Ultimately, though, I think as a committee, what we have been tasked to look at is, okay, if, and to cost out basic income guarantee, but that would lift all islanders to that point that they are out of poverty is the long and the short of it. But again, I think that where we struggle, where I certainly do to a certain extent, is just going back to the question, suggestions that I'd asked Nigel, that, okay, we take them, an individual and or families, to that level that they are out of poverty by providing a basic income guarantee. But again, to not have that have any negative consequences in a workforce that right now has challenges in and of itself.
Yes, I think it's important to, if earning through the labor market can't get you up to that level, and if you are working, like it might be, like if social assistance is kind of designed to provide for just the very basics, the program will fall short of trying to provide with more. So you might end up with, if the number is, and I'm not sure what the right number is, but let's say it's, someone mentioned 20,000, but it's possible through work, you may only be able to make 18,000. That, like, some kind of a top up beyond earnings, whether it's earnings and perhaps unemployment insurance to bridge part of the year, that, the program would have to become more generous to afford people that level of income. But not to really have a disincentive to participate in the labor force. So it's really only through earnings that we have the system that we have to run government programs and
So we do have more questions, so I'm going to come back this way. Thank you. All right, Michelle Beaton.
Chair, hi Nigel, thank you for your presentation. I just have a couple of, I guess, clarifying questions from the presentation. On the basic design rates and brackets slide, you indicate the revenues, or sorry, where each bracket falls. Does the department track how much revenue is collected from each of those brackets? And then even to take it a step, like drill down a little bit into that number, if you only fit in bracket 1 and you don't fit in any other bracket, do you have those figures that would be accessible?
Yes, we could.
Okay.
We could determine that, how much income tax is paid in the various brackets. Yes.
Right. But just to isolate who's in bracket 1 that wouldn't spill into bracket 2, so if you are underneath that minimum amount, not the total number that sits in bracket 1, but those that are solely in bracket 1.
Okay, so
That do not
the
exceed.
number of people in that income range?
And the revenue, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is that,
Yeah.
so I'm not on the committee, I don't know what the process is, but to get those numbers provided, if that's, I don't know if you guys do motions in this committee or how you want to handle that.
We've just been asking presenters if something comes up, so would that be possible for the committee to get that information?
I think so, yes. It might even be available.
Somewhere around 16,000 people for the first bracket.
I'd want to go back and check.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair.
But I think, that basic information to describe the population of taxpayers, we can provide a count of how many people are in the first bracket, the second bracket and third bracket,
Okay.
maybe if you wish.
And the revenue, I believe, Michelle, you're
Yeah, the
asking for
revenue,
each
that's
bracket,
associated to
that, from the earners in each bracket to get an idea of how much tax revenue comes from those different levels?
And then because I love data, even if you could drill that down to, you know, those that are below 65 and those that are above 65. So I don't know if you have that.
So by two age
Yeah, so we just
brackets?
understand. Yeah.
Under,
And then the only other
Michelle?
yeah, I'm sorry. The only other question I had was on the negative income piece. Incomes that are actually taxable. So is there a location just to direct us to where obviously your T4, your incomes and all those are taxable incomes, but for those that are on fixed income, can you identify which of those programs are actually taxed?
trying to,
Or is that information that you could bring back? So for instance, if you earn EI, do you get provincial taxed on that? Or if you get income from a provincial program, from a federal program, on which federal programs are provincial taxes charged on?
okay.
Do you know what I mean?
There was a supplemental handout with the forms. So on the federal form, there's
That one?
yes, so on the federal form, I think perhaps on the second page, it is where you document your sources of income. And I think perhaps most of your question of what's included is either in the total income, there are, but this isn't a total reflection of all your available resources, as there are some benefits that are not reportable, so you don't report them on your income tax return. An important one would be child benefits.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't capture it here because it's not a reportable amount.
Right.
But for families with children, it's a.
But let's say,
Michelle?
sorry, let's say a senior on fixed income, that, you know, all of their incomes are coming from, you know, whether it's old age security, CPP, GIS, they pay taxes, right? Of which, so I guess what I'm trying to clarify, is it everything that's listed here is taxed in this section, in this step 2 section, is everything taxed?
In the case, so for a senior that's a low-income senior receiving the guaranteed income supplement, that is a non-taxable amount. It's reportable, but then in the taxable income, is it the taxable income? I guess it's under the step 3. It
Is your-
comes
and then step-
out. So it's not, it wouldn't be subject to tax, but it is reportable.
Okay.
All right. So I think we'll move on. We have Gord.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in. This is
Oh, did you?
Sorry, no, so I'm just getting on the list, that's all.
oh, okay, sorry. Just maybe our job is to come up with some numbers for a pilot program to see a basic income guarantee, you know, over the next 12 months, obviously. And I just had some questions around the basic design rate. So we talked about potentially somewhere on the line of 16,000 people paying that 9.8% rate. I'm going to do like a little case study with you and see if we needed, and this system needed to generate an extra $25 million, just this system alone, okay, to fund a basic income guarantee. What would happen to those rate percentages if this system needed to generate an extra $25 million?
Well, you would have a lot of flexibility to design that system. Generally, I think if you wanted to provide more benefits to low-income people, you would have to come from people who are not in low income, so maybe middle income or high income. How you want to distribute that additional tax, there's a lot of flexibility. You can design additional brackets to isolate maybe more at the middle income area where there are more people. I guess generally you might want to think about designing a tax system that has a broad base and low rates versus narrow and like a narrow tax base with high rates. As people react to high rates, they'll avoid them.
Yeah.
Gord?
And would this require, I know, so are four tax brackets, is this common across the country, or are there more tax rates in different provinces? Are there, you know?
Across the provinces, I guess there's a general move to have more. So we have three explicit. We have surtax. The surtax effectively acts like a fourth bracket.
Okay.
It's not entirely clear to many people either the rate or when it applies. That one of the things you'd want to improve in the tax system is that it be clear on when and by how much you're going to pay. The surtax kind of is less clear. It's a little opaque as to the rate. Like it's a 10% surtax payable on $12,500 of provincial tax. But at what level of income do you start paying the surtax? You have to figure it out. It moves around depending on your circumstances, but for a single person it kicks in about $100,000.
100,000, okay. And for us as a committee, as we're designing this, I'm thinking more along the lines of program design. Obviously, we're looking at some of these different things. Is this something that you often do? I think to design a basic income guarantee for Prince Edward Island, we're going to need a lot of planning and preparation. Could you comment on that in your section in government? Do you guys do a lot of program design, or is that?
We do some. I think we've got the basic tools to analyze changes, in particular the changes to the income tax system. It is a challenge when you start looking across provincial income tax system, federal income tax system, and the various provincial support programs. But even just kind of bringing together and looking at it on a consistent basis, the tax and benefit system, principally say social assistance and some other income tested programs, that would I think put you in a better starting position to better understand the system we have, which is it's a system of systems.
Yeah.
But if you look at it through kind of one lens, how does it treat people in relation to income?
Yeah.
And by certain family types. Like I think that would be a piece of information that would be helpful in your efforts.
Okay, thanks a lot. That helps a lot.
Thanks, Nigel. Always good to hear these presentations again. It is around budget time, brings back a lot of memories. But so I guess in Ernie and everybody kind of touched on a little bit. How hard would it be? And I've seen what you've done with our electricity rates and all those types of things that we've done over the past few years, and the numbers that you guys behold is pretty phenomenal what you can do. How hard would it be to create a threshold, to give us an example of a threshold that we could actually take and look and see what effects it has from the federal tax perimeters and the provincial tax perimeters? So we talked about we increased it by 30% allowable income on low-income individuals. We've created people coming off social assistance. We've created, I think it was a 1 or 2 year assistance on healthcare or some aspects of healthcare to allow them to get back into the workforce. Like, this is really big. I don't think just changing the taxes is gonna eliminate the issue that we're trying to obtain on a basic income guarantee, a workable basic income guarantee. But a starting point for this committee, would it not be wise to have a presentation on a threshold and then build around that threshold, which would allow you to move the threshold to create some sort of significant program that shows all the dynamics of the social side of it, to see what effects it's having on, because I know, just in Gord's comments, you know, the consumption tax is the middle class, basically. They're the ones that are, so for us to increase those brackets might not be the appropriate thing to do, because all of a sudden your consumption tax starts to decrease, your revenue starts to decrease. So would it not be better just to start with a threshold, and I think everybody's kind of saying that, from your department, to show us what the dynamics would be on if it's 20,000 or minimum wage at 18,000 or something to that effect. Because you're talking about childcare support, you're talking about, there's a whole list, as you well know, and it's complicated. But it might be, I'm visual, it'd be better for me to actually see what that could look like and what effects it's going to have on different programs. Just curious.
Yeah, no, that is trying to look through those programs, and understanding the dynamics of what happens to benefits as incomes rise. And, family types are, it's an important dimension, whether you're a single or a couple, or a single parent with children, or a couple parent with children, or seniors. You know, you get into many kind of family type scenarios. But yes, that's I think that's precisely the work that you would need to understand on a consolidated basis the tax and benefit system that currently exists, you know, as it exists, because that's the system we have now. And if we're going to change something,
Yeah, it's not easy.
if you do something over here, well, what are its effects? There's already there's a number of programs kind of jockeying around here that end up potentially jamming up on each other, perhaps by not having a kind of a coordinated assessment of how these programs affect people's income over a range of earned incomes. Because, like I said earlier, it's important to see what level of basic minimum income might someone have with no earnings, and the question of whether that's sufficient is, you know, maybe the second question. But what are their circumstances now with no income? And when you start adding income, what happens to their available resources to buy shelter, buy food, clothe themselves, children, and try to avoid the situation, and I think we have, where people are made worse off by work, where $1 of earnings results in more than $1 of benefit withdrawal, or increase in tax. So that's a lot of that work is really on the benefit side, I think. But as incomes rise, the committee may want to think about, like, this interaction is probably not one where you can think of as on-off switches. Like, if your income is a certain threshold, you get benefits in full. And if you're over the threshold, you lose benefits kind of in full. Those are types of programs that can be very disruptive to people's decision to work. As like a line in the, a line that says if you earn, let's say, pick a number, $20,000, you get the benefit. And maybe that benefit's $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 of benefit. But if you were to have a dollar over the 20,000, then you would lose the benefit. Those types of programs, like these toggle switches or on-off switches, become very disruptive to people's thoughts about working, taking an extra shift, taking a pay raise. If you're right on that line or close to it, a small increase in earned income could potentially trigger a fairly sizable reduction in benefits. So that would be a common message and theme, and whenever departments are thinking about either new programs or changes to programs, that would be one of the things we would be advocating for, is to avoid the toggle switch eligibility, where if you're out of income testing is probably I don't think we can avoid it, but the expression of income testing needs to be more nuanced than just if you're below the line, you get it, you're above the line, you don't. There needs to be some transition from receiving full benefits to some measure of partial benefits to receiving no benefits as income rises. Those, I'm not sure that there's a magic kind of formula for this, other than that when you stack all the benefits on top of each other, for social assistance, for housing, for drugs, etc., and then layer on income taxes for people in the maybe lower to middle income, that a dollar of income, an additional dollar of income doesn't result in more than a dollar of reduction in other benefits and supports. Or if that is the case, that you have to be very clear-eyed in why that is the case, because people will react to this. If work pays less, they will.
And just before we move on, Heath, I just wanted to acknowledge that kind of makes me think of something we've heard from previous presenters as well about the social assistance program and access to health and dental benefits, that knowing that if they are not going to be on social assistance any longer through work, that might be a disincentive because they might not have access to those benefits. So, it is certainly a factor to consider. I wanted to just clarify a point that Heath brought up that I had a little different in my notes. So the 30% of allowable income is not for low-income workers, but for those on social assistance, correct? Specific to social assistance. 30%.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we're not using low income and social assistance as interchangeable, because they're very different things, and there are many islanders who are low income not accessing social assistance that are under the poverty line. So just wanted to highlight that for the committee as well. Heath, did you have a question?
Yeah. It's interesting, your last comment, Nigel, on whether they want to go to work or not. When Dr. Tom McDowell was here, I think he said 56% were ultimately employed during the pilot. But then most of them, like a lot of the 56%, correct me if I'm wrong because I was not on that committee, they left their position. So exactly what you're saying. So the threshold is created, and we see it in the seniors home repair program, the seniors housing program, and you put a figure of 32,000 in or 33,000. If they go $500 over, they can't access it. And I know as politicians we get it all the time, or at least I do. And I think that you're exactly right. And so I guess that's what I'm coming back to, is if we could see a threshold, create a threshold to see the numbers around that threshold, to see what effect it's going to have on, and in all fairness, I mean, the taxes are there to generate revenue so we can reinvest in healthcare and education and so on and so forth. So I think it's extremely important that we see both sides of this, and that whether you're in government or not government, and we could be as critical as we want sitting on this side of the fence now, but I still think it's extremely important to take a look at the big picture. So has there been any research or history done through Department of Finance at all on this basic income pilot? Excuse me.
In the Department of Finance, it's something that's part of the popular press, and it's not a concept that I guess would be, it's not a concept that we're unfamiliar with. The concept of a negative income tax has been studied, just some, but not as a formalized report. We just keep up on basic trends and the work of this committee. Trying to observe what the deliberations and the interest. But in terms of a formalized report on it, not by the Department of Finance.
Heath, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did. Just back to Be Aware, Get Your Share, which I think is a phenomenal program. And I know there's still people out there, and I know you talked about there's access to CRA and access to people to do income tax, but I seen it as a problem that people aren't even aware to get to that point. Maybe literacy plays an issue on this. So I would suggest, to the government, to do some more education on that program. Now, we know it brought in over $100 million into Prince Edward Island since its initiation. So I guess what I'm saying, Nigel, is if there was any other way to educate those last remaining few people, because I've seen this work personally with people that I've dealt with, and Be Aware, Get Your Share was retroactive, and they substantially got quite a bit of money. In one case was $3,400, which to these people is like winning a jackpot. So I hope government really looks beyond the CRA and getting their taxes done, but also to educate through the school system possibly, or the counselors or what have you, to ensure that those people are aware that file your income tax. Whether you have to or not, whether you want to or not, file your income tax, because there may be a substantial amount of money at the end of the rainbow for you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from a couple of my colleagues' comments there, one of the barriers, I think, for people filing income tax is the risk that they have to pay, even when they're low income. So there is a challenge there when you are low income, and even a small bill can be a very large bill if your income is less than $18,000 a year. So there is a challenge of people choosing not to file because the risk is one that they don't know how to address. So there are both sides to that we need to be aware of, but overall that filing is critical for us to be able to access so many other things to support individuals. And so one of those is to think about how we can support islanders that are in a situation where there may be a financial hit for them in the process of filing, which is a social program approach, not a revenue program approach. But it does lead me to a question for you, Nigel, which is this may sound very basic, but I really need to clarify for my own benefit and hopefully for the committee, is recommendations or requests that we make to you here. Obviously we're coming to you as sort of asking for a number of different things here. Is that in the scope for you to be able to do so from this committee, to request for you to provide this information back? Is that appropriate, and is that okay for you from your department to do so? Because also we're asking for quite a lot of additional follow-up here.
I only have one question to follow up.
Okay. I have a couple more to ask. So.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Certainly, I think as far as I know, I don't have a lot of familiarity with responding to committee, but I think we can certainly try to help fill in some information gaps where we can. I certainly want to see what's possible.
And I will just add, Nigel, if we as a committee request anything of you that you are not sure that you can commit to here today, that's perfectly fine. Just, let us know and we'll go from there. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, because one of the things we've talked a lot about in this committee as we're getting ready to sort of perhaps our interim report with the coming sitting is modelling and be able to sort of begin to put some parameters around what it is that we want to think about, even from interim recommendations, to help us guide our work and provide some context in terms of where are we going. And so I expect that as we have some more of those conversations, we may come back to you with more specific modelling requests, or to work with perhaps other experts externally that we've identified who can also assist with modelling. And again, that would come from the chair, but I just wanted to get that on the record, that we're at that stage where we're actually looking at putting together some structure around some of the things that we're considering. I guess the other thing that I also wanted to clarify with you is that this committee, even in its recommendations to the legislature, does not have any power to compel government to actually do this work. This would be part of a recommendation that then be considered by the legislature. Am I correct in understanding that any changes to the tax system are done by the Department of Finance at the instruction of the Minister?
Minister Finance is responsible for the Income Tax Act. So the minister would be responsible for amendments to the bill. And then I might need some help from the clerk on the process of making changes to the Income Tax Act. They happen as part of the budget bill, as they and will require legislation.
That was going to be my next question. I think this is legislative changes that we potentially are, especially if we're talking about exemption levels and stuff. These are not happening in a departmental level. This is legislative change level.
That's right.
Right.
And the process to do those, it's rooted in the Constitution, going back to basics. If you want to raise a tax, either federally or provincially, it has to be done in the legislature.
Anna, did you have one more question?
Yeah, and Chair, so the reason for raising that is obviously because it makes us, in terms of the process for the authority to proceed, the process for presenting and developing that legislation and how that would happen outside the scope of this committee, but through potentially direction, and then the timeline accordingly. But also that also impacts, Chair, our discussions about pilot versus program, because a change to the income tax system that requires a legislative change is not something that you undertake on a trial basis. As much as any legislation can always be changed and rolled back, again, generally we don't try to do that with legislation, and so I think it's really important for the committee to have that concept. When we're discussing this, my other question for you, Nigel, because that was very much a statement. My other question for you would be, I don't see a way that income taxes could be targeted to a selected group of the population other than one that already exists through income levels or demographics. So I can see, for instance, tax credits that relate to somebody who identifies as a person with a disability or a single parent or by an age limit, but I can't see a way that the tax system could apply to a randomly selected group of 5,000 people in PEI, which is what we talk about potentially when we do a pilot. Would you be able to comment on that?
Yeah, the tax system will apply to everybody.
Right.
I think that what you're trying to do is probably best achieved through some type of a program where most of the work will happen through benefit delivery. It really is outside of an income tax program, which is about raising revenue from people.
And then reallocating it.
And we have programs and departments that are probably best suited for, taking that money and targeting it to through benefit programs.
So Chair, just my final comment is
Yes,
that to follow on again from my colleague Heath's comments earlier, income tax changes are a component of potentially a broader scope of a program that we may be looking at here, not only because of the integration of the revenue generation into program delivery, but because it is not the only tool we have in the toolbox. But it does change, if we are considering this, it does provide some parameters around what it is that we achieve and how we achieve it. My last ask for you is in the event that this was approved and went through to the point of legislation, how much how long does it take to implement changes in the tax system to take effect? Like, I saw one here where you had like the 2000 change, and then it was a year, and then it was a year later. What's the kind of time frame that's involved for those significant changes to take effect?
Well...
Depends when it happens, I guess.
Small changes on, small parameter changes. So if we want to change like the basic personal amount from this number to that number, not complicated. There are times when there are better times to announce it, and there are really limited times to actually legislate it. Those are quite simple. Not to oversimplify it, but we know how to do it. And we know that process fairly well. There are potentially things that you might recommend that we don't know what that looks like, or its implications. And working through those, the more fundamental the changes you're considering, the more thought it's going to take to understand, okay, what are the implications if we were to do that? And is everybody still okay with that result? In the legislative process is the drafting part really comes from being clear on what it is you want to achieve. Not to oversimplify that process, but it does take some time, some thought. I wouldn't want to rush that. It might take a year.
Ola.
Oh, I have a question about the basic exemption. Obviously, if you raise the exemption, you have a net loss to the province that would be roughly the same as the provincial portion of the tax benefit to the taxpayer. Who pays the federal portion? Where does that money come from? Is there any penalty to the province?
I think I understand the question. So the individual will effectively does two sets of returns.
Yeah.
A federal return,
Yeah.
which is to the federal government, a provincial return, which goes to the provincial government, both of which are done through the Canada Revenue Agency as our administrator. But there's really, I can't think of any kind of interaction effect between, if the federal government made a change to one of their tax rates.
No, I'm talking about the exemption. If the province raises the exemption, does the federal exemption automatically goes up?
No, they're separate.
They're two separate
systems.
Okay, sorry.
Ola,
Okay.
did you have any more questions?
I have another question that relates to, you were talking about the clawback on provincial social assistance benefits being reduced from 90% to 70%, which is obviously a great improvement, but still 70% is way higher on extra earned dollars than high income earners get. So my question is, and it really applies to all benefits, whether it's basic income or other social benefits, what should ideally the rate be if we already have a graduated tax system? Is there any reason why the clawback, if you will, should be any greater than the tax rate at that level?
You can think of the benefit system, like you can think of it as a negative income tax system. But if the decision or the choice is to not make something universal, you have to kind of withdraw that benefit over some range of income. It's this, kind of the speed at which you withdraw that support. I think is should it be no more than the tax rate? If you withdrew the benefits at maybe the near 20%, the benefits, people will receive benefits over a very large range of income, which may not be what was contemplated. It's just determining when do the benefits stop. That will define kind of how much the benefits are and when do benefits go to zero. Will basically define the speed at which they're withdrawn. The interaction between earnings and withdrawing benefits, it's an important consideration, and work should pay more than not. What is the right rate? I'm not sure that there's a specific magic to a rate, but certainly less than 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Ernie Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Nigel, just wondering, under your position, federal fiscal relations, one of the things that we've had the discussion on here is just the possibility of the federal government partnering on a pilot program as we go forward. From your experience, what is the process, first of all, to initiate such a request, but I guess maybe more importantly, the timeline, again, from your experience, that the federal government, that it would take to make a decision and provide that decision back to the province? Like, are we looking request goes in and that you would hear within a month or 2 months, or what length of time potentially would we be looking at?
I'm probably not in a good position to opine.
Okay, appreciate your honesty on that then. But
it's between the two governments would have to come to some arrangement. The pilots or working together only works with willing partners. How long it takes,
I guess what I'm, yes, thank you, Chair, thinking there, okay, that if we have, federal minister that is receptive to the idea, then I would think that, okay, this is an additional request. Would it have to, the process that would have to work through at the federal level in order to be approved?
Well,
or would the federal minister have the authority within his or her mandate to be able to do it as a one-off themselves?
I think whatever that would look like would probably require an appropriation to authorize the expenditure, which would have to go through through Parliament. So we would have to go through like normal budget setting and appropriation process at the federal level for authorization to spend the money.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. So a formal request, Nigel, for some additional modelling to add to your list which I'd mentioned earlier was around the low-income tax reduction as the direct measure. It would be very helpful if we could have a model from that looks at increasing the threshold to the 20,000 rate, which is the market basket measure, and associated increase to non-refundable credit. I don't know what that amount would be, but I guess there may be more than one model that you could show to sort of try and address some of that inequity that I talked about before, to sort of bring the amount up that people can retain. With that, it would be how much would that remove from our potential revenue line?
So the first question being that raising the threshold of the low-income tax reduction
on the LITR, yeah.
From the current 18
to 20.
20?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second part is where the current credit is 350, which is equivalent more or less to about, they said, 3,500 of income prior to. Then we need to also, how do we bring that up, and how much does it cost if we do to sort of increase that refundable tax credit to get people closer to retaining as much of their income as possible towards that 20,000.
Again, not that you have to answer that now.
No. I understand this is modelling of a lot of, but if that is an option to model, that would be great. If not, then we need to look for alternatives, but it would be incredibly helpful to be able to start with as you said, a single point of entry that specifically address, just to give us some ideas of what impact are we talking about, from a financial, from a revenue generation aspect.
I think those are answerable questions.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm good. That's what
All right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. All right, so again, thank you so much, Nigel Burns, for being here today and for your very detailed presentation, for taking the time to answer all of our questions. I noticed that we don't have a lot on the agenda after this, so I just want to test the room to see if there is new business being brought forward. Anybody planning to bring forward new business? No. All right, so if you'll just indulge me, we'll do this last little piece here then. So with moving on from new business, Emily, do you want to give a little bit of an update on sort of the upcoming meetings? Is that okay? And then we will adjourn the meeting.
And Chair, if I could just clarify some of the information the committee was wanting to get back from the department, just so that we're on the same page, and I will follow up with you, Nigel, after these requests. It was raised by Michelle Beaton to look into how many people fall within each of the different 3 brackets and how much revenue is brought back in each bracket, and to have those drilled down of below 65 age and above 65. So the committee is looking to have that information back. And then, Hannah, and the last piece that you raised about the low income tax reduction rate increasing from the 18,000 to the 20,000. And I'll go back to the transfer to fund, the full details. But was there anything else that the committee was expecting at this point to?
There was a little bit more to that request, right, Hannah, as well?
It's kind of a 3-parter.
Okay, yeah. I'll follow up with the transcript to get exactly what those 3 parts were, but that's something the committee's interested in getting back. And was there anything else that had come up throughout the presentation, or at this point it'll be those 2 different pieces? Okay, great. I will follow up with the Department of Finance and Nigel. And then in terms of upcoming meetings, the next meeting is scheduled for Friday, March 13th, and that will be beginning at 1 o'clock. The committee is then meeting to discuss its report on Wednesday, March 18th. So that meeting will be in camera to discuss the report, and that will be beginning at 8:30. And then the following week, there's a meeting Wednesday, March 25th at 9:30.
Okay.
So those are the scheduled meetings for the month of March.
Thank you, Emily. Great. All right, so with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Ernie Hudson. Right, we are adjourned.